Chapter 7 of The Seven Stairs by Stuart Brent. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7 Farewell to the Seven Stairs. I had to break it to them gently, and to myself as well. It took a long time to compose the letter to go to all my clients. Sometime between June 30th and July 20th, the letter said, the Seven Stairs will end its stand on Rush Street and move to 670 North Michigan Avenue, where it will resume life as Stuart Brent Books and Records. Everything that the Seven Stairs has come to stand for will continue. The place will be lovely and cozy and warm, the conversations easily as crazy and possibly more inspired. More than that, all of the wonderful possibilities that we have been developing over the past 5 years can now bear fruit. I reviewed the history of the shop, trying to set down some of the memorable landmarks in its growth. And so it has gone, I wrote blithely. Always fresh and magical, punctuated by famous and admired visitors, Joseph Szigeti, Catherine Cornell, Eliot Paul, Ernest Hemingway, Arthur Koestler, Frieda Fromm Reichmann, Nelson Algren, Gore Vidal, Carol Bryce, many others. Wonderful talk, parties, exhibits. You have been a part of it with us. But physically, the Seven Stairs could never meet our needs fully. It was too small. Congestion forced us to give up those author cocktail parties for launching good new books. It kept us from promoting lectures and exhibits. It put a definite limit to the size of our stock. And even if we could have made more space, we couldn't have afforded it without an increase in street trade, which Rush Street couldn't provide. However, for all the crowding, the worn appearance, the careless bookkeeping, the hopeless methods of keeping our stock of books and records in proper order, the Seven Stairs set the tone we dreamed of. That tone, with all the ease and informality, will go with it to Michigan Avenue. Probably nothing like it has ever happened to the Avenue. It's about time it did. My message to the faithful was heartfelt, but more than a little disingenuous. It mentioned the economics of bookselling only in passing, and these economic factors had at last caught up with me. I might ignore my accountant, but when Jenny and I were invited among the well-fed and well-cared-for, we were distinctly surrounded by the aura of the poor relation. I might congratulate myself upon having accomplished, against absurd odds, so much of what I had initially dreamed about, but I was no longer responsible only to this dream. I had a growing family, and I wasn't unhappy about this either. It seemed to me, in spite of all the evidence the modern world has to present to the contrary, that the fullness of life, in which the feeding, clothing, and housing of a family traditionally figure, ought not, as a matter of principle, stand irrevocably opposed to personal fulfillment or spiritual realization. There wasn't room in the Seven Stairs, it is true, for books and records, for parties, for anything else. But room is not the great necessity. It can always be made if the spirit is willing. The plain fact of the matter was that my situation was economically self-limiting in its scope and its momentum. Only a certain number of people could be drawn into its sphere, and time and the accidents of time would take their toll. Some of the parties did not draw. Some of the clientele who dropped out or who were alienated through the vagaries of my personal relations were not replaced. I was either going to have to regress toward my beginnings or advance toward something which would suggest, at least, the possibility of greater scope. Did this possibility exist along a well-traveled marketplace, the Chicago version of Fifth Avenue, although pictorially more impressive than its Manhattan counterpart, which lay only a block away from the questionable Rush Street area? The opportunity to confront this question came about again through one of the apparent accidents of life, which I identify under the rather occult heading of attractiveness. Without Jack Pritzker, there could have been no move to Michigan Avenue. Jack and his wife Rhoda came into our lives at a cocktail party and became close friends. Rhoda is English by birth and wears her charm and dignity like a delicate mystery. She has a gift for seeing and has written wonderful articles as a correspondent for British newspapers. Jack also has the effortless manner that stems from a quality of mind. He is as unlike me as any man can be. Impassive, almost secretive. Yet I have never known a more comfortable man to be with. He is a lawyer with large interests in real estate and a quiet passion for being a mover behind the success of others. He will not forsake you when the going is rough, but in his relations he holds to a fine line between friendship and duty, and holds you to this line also. I had already experienced the danger of the kind of benefactor who tends to take over your life for you, but with Jack Pritzker there is never this danger. He prefers to see you make it on your own. If you are beset by circumstances which you cannot control, he is there. But if you are merely waiting for something to happen, you can expect nothing but the criticism you deserve. This gentle, quiet man, tough yet sentimental, absorbed in his business, yet somehow viewing it as an experiment with life rather than a livelihood, devoted to concrete matters and the hard world of finance and power, yet in conversation concerned only with the breath of life and the humanness of experience, provided a scarcely felt polarity that gave direction to my often chaotic forces. When I heard that Jack had a financial interest in a medical office building under construction on Michigan Avenue, I asked to rent one of the street-level stores. It was not a matter of seeking financial assistance. It was entirely enough to be accepted as the kind of prestige tenant normally sought for such a location. But when Hy Abrams, my lawyer, went to see about the lease, he reported that Jack remarked, "If you think I'm letting Stewart in this store to see him fail, you are mistaken. I have no intention of standing by and watching him and his family tenting out in Grant Park." But even though someone might be keeping a weather eye on my survival, I had to face up to my own money problems. It is madness to go into business without a bankroll under the mattress. I thought I could see my way to making it on the avenue, but where was the cash outlay coming from for fixtures, additional stock, everything? Not even my reformed accountant could prepare a financial statement that would qualify me for additional bank loans. There was a way, however, and it was opened to me by a client who, as a vice president of the First National Bank of Chicago, was about the last person I thought of approaching with my difficulties. I knew about banks by now, although I had somewhat revised my opinions about the personal limitations of all bankers. In fact, It was always a source of genuine pleasure to me when this particular banker, a tall, handsome man with graying hair and a fine pair of gray eyes to match, came into the shop. When I told him of my projected move, it was natural for him to ask how I was financing it. I told him I didn't know, but I was certainly going to have to find a way. "May I offer a suggestion?" he asked. We sat down by the fire, and he told me first what I already knew, that normally when a businessman needs extra money, especially for a cyclical business dependent on certain seasons, he will go to the bank for a short-term loan, say for 90 days. But in New York, he told me, there is a large department store that finances its own improvement and expansion programs. Instead of going to the bank, the store goes to its customers. My friend suggested that I do the same. "Here's how it works," he said. "Write a letter to your 100 best accounts, explaining what you hope to do. Ask them to help by sending you $100 in advance payment against future purchases. In return, you will offer them a 20% discount on all merchandise purchased under this plan. And of course, they may take as long a time as they wish in using up the amount they have advanced." Even as he spoke, he pulled out his pen and began composing the letter. We worked on it for an hour, and the next day we met at lunch to draft the final copy. I sent the approved message to 125 people, and I received 125 replies, each with a $100 check. There remained little else to do in the way of arrangements except to break my present lease. It was not easy, but it was a pleasure. Now that I planned to move, my landlord's attitude was something to behold. He danced the length of the shop on his tiny feet, his cane twirling madly, alternating between cries of "Excellent! Your future is assured," and "But of course you'll pay the rent here too." He did not know, he said, what the corporation would think of any proposal for subletting the premises. Finally, he doffed his black hat, waved good-bye, and skipped out of the store. A week later, I heard from him. The answer on subleasing was a qualified yes. If I could get a tenant as responsible and dignified as myself, and with equally brilliant prospects for success, they would consider it. I advertised for weeks, and no such madman responded. Then, one day, the answer walked in the door. A huge man with the general physique of the late Sidney Greenstreet, hooded eyes, and a great beard. He looked around, blinked like an owl, and said he'd take it. It was as simple as that. I realized with a slight sinking feeling that I was now perfectly free to move to the Avenue. My formidable successor to the home of the 7 Stairs turned out to indeed be a man of brilliant prospects. He opened a thought factory, evidenced by a sign to this effect and bulletin boards covered with slips of paper bearing thoughts. Needless to say, he was in the public relations and advertising business. I have always felt grateful to him, but I never got up courage to cross that once adored threshold and see Mr. Sperry making thoughts. When the Columbia record people approached me concerning the possibility of a party in connection with the release of a record by the jazz pianist Max Miller, it struck me this might be just the thing as a rousing and possibly rowdy farewell to the 7 Stairs. Somehow, when I phoned our original fellows in literature, the gaiety of my announcement did not come off. I called Bob Parrish, who had once turned an autographing party into a magic show, and was greeted by an awesome silence, followed by a lame, "We'll be there." There was similar response from others on the list, but they did come, all of them, even Samuel Putnam, who journeyed all the way from Connecticut. We had rented a piano and managed to get it in through the back of the building by breaking through a wall. The bricks were terribly loose anyway, and it wasn't much work to put them back and replaster when it was all over. Max Miller had promised to bring along a good sideman, and he did, Louis Armstrong. Armstrong was immediately comfortable in the shop. "This is a wise man," he said. He didn't know I was giving up the ghost at the 7 Stairs. Perhaps the end of the stairs was a symbol for more than the demise of a personal bookstore. During the period in which I had set up shop, the old Chicago Sun had launched the first literary Sunday supplement devoted entirely to books, to be published by a newspaper outside of New York City. At least one issue of this supplement, called Book Week, had carried more book advertising than either the New York Times Book Review or the Herald Tribune magazine of books. The Chicago Tribune had followed suit with a book supplement, and together with the Sun offered a platform for people like Butcher, Babcock, North, Apple, Frederick, Cogan, Wendt, Spektorsky, and others who were not only distinguished critics and authors, but who truly loved the world of books. Their efforts had certainly contributed to the climate that made the 7 Stairs possible. The diminution of this influence, today only the Tribune carries a full-scale book supplement, was in direct relationship to the decline of my own enterprise. For the last party, everyone came. There were the remaining literary editors, Fanny Butcher of the Tribune, Emmett Dedman of the Sun-Times, and Van Allen Bradley of the Daily News, the latter two fated to move along to editorial positions on their newspapers. There was Otto Esenschimmel, and there was Olive Carithers, for whom one of our first literary parties had been given. The psychoanalysts came, Lionel Blitzton, who had assured everyone that I really couldn't make the move, Roy Grinker, Fred Robbins, Harvey Lewis, and of course Robert Corman, who was still to see me through so much. There was Sidney Morris, the architect, Henry Dry, the entrepreneur, Ed Weiss, the advertising executive who discovered the subliminal world and asked which twin had the Tony, and Everett Kovler and Oscar Getz of the liquor industry. Lewis played and sang and signed records and shook hands and sang some more, and Miller played and autographed while the apparent hilarity grew, the shouting, laughing, and singing. It was a very little shop, and had there been rafters, you could have said it was full to them. But Ben Cartman was grim, Reuel Denny seemed bewildered, and above all, the old gang, Algren, Conroy, Parrish, Turkle, Motley, Herman Cogan, they were being charming and decent enough, but something was out of kilter. I had never seen them more affable, but it wasn't quite right. Being affable wasn't really their line. Turkle occasionally emerged from the throng to MC the performance. Studs Terkel is a Chicago phenomenon, a talented actor and impresario of the wellsprings of culture, whether jazz or folk songs. In the early days of commercial television, when the experimenting was being done in Chicago, he created a type of entertainment perfectly adapted to the intimate nature of the medium. Studd's place was the hottest show in Chicago so far as the response of viewers went, but it soon disappeared. Apparently, what Chicago offered could not be exported. The strange belief continues to persist that the tastes of America can properly be tested only on the Broadway crowd, the knowing, or the Hollywood Boulevard misfits, the paranoiac. The crowds and misfits elsewhere do not seem to constitute a suitable national index. Anyway, so far we have not been able to export Studs. In the growing crowd and increasing turbulence and raucousness, I didn't care any longer what happened. I just stood in a corner and tried to look friendly. Rhoda and Jack Pritzker came in with a party of friends. People were crushing about Studs and Lewis, urging Lewis to sing and Max to play. Suddenly I was terribly tired. I wanted air. I was just getting out when the ceiling came down. The toilet was on the second floor. It served the entire building, and, never very dependable, it had come to the end of the line. When it broke, the water came flooding down through the ceiling onto the people in the shop and taking the plaster with it. Lewis was soaked. I shall always remember Rhoda Pritzker barraged by falling plaster and Dorothea Parrish losing her poise and letting out a war whoop. Studs got a piece of ceiling in his eye. Max Miller was directly beneath the broken pipe and suffered the consequences. For some moments it seemed as though the total disintegration of the aged structure was at hand. I ran up the stairs and began applying my best flood control technique. Finally, with the aid of a pile of rags, we managed to staunch the flow. Those engaged were exhausted, but the party was made. Now the laughter rang with real gaiety, and the songs soared with enthusiasm. It was one hell of a wake. The last song was Honeysuckle Rose. The damp musicians thanked everyone for listening and said goodbye. There was a hurry of leave-taking. Soon only Ira Blitzton, Bob Corman, and Ben Cartman remained. There was nothing left but to turn off the lights and close up. Yet I couldn't bring myself to rise from behind the desk. No more building inspectors, no more landlord wishing me good luck, no more broken plumbing, just the end of the world. All I had to do was get up, look around for the last time, turn off the lights. Look around at what? The old bookshelves made out of third-grade lumber? The dark green walls that Tweedy and Carl Dry had helped paint? The absurd little bench with its hopeful inscriptions? I didn't need to worry about the bench. I could take that with me. There was the barrel in the corner, half full of apples, the battered old coffee pot sitting on the hot plate, and the string dangling from the ceiling from which a salami once depended. I always bought my sausage from a little old Hasidic Jew who appeared from time to time in his long black coat, black hat, and with a gray and black beard extending down his chest. We would haggle over the price, and he would shower me with blessings when he left. All of this was spiced with Rabelaisian jests. Once I asked him, while studying the sausage situation, "Tell me, do you think sex is here to stay?" He thought a moment. "I don't know why not," he said. "It's in a wonderful location." Somehow I did not see a salami hanging in my new Michigan Avenue location. But onward and upward. Don't turn back now, or Lionel's prediction will come true. All is well. The lease is signed. The fixtures are paid for. You've okayed the color the walls are to be painted. No one is threatening you, and you've put down a month's advance on the rent. So please get up and turn off the lights." It was not I, but a zombie moving mechanically toward the future who touched the button, left the room, and softly shut the door. End of chapter 7.
Please subscribe to update new videos. Please share and like if you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much.